Yo, I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. Jada's trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario, that mean I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre. Got them all day like a Kanye, but I'm way better getting cheddar in Monterey. But Jack, you don't know, man. You got the show, man. You want roast beef? Well, I'm Arby's.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and it's time for the first deck tech of Ixalan Standard. Patreon voted on what they wanted to see to start things off, and the deck you wanted to see kick the season off, not even close. So today I'm going to bring you red-green dinosaurs. I already know what your first question is. Why not Naya dinosaurs? Very good question. You're super astute. Well, the short answer to that is that I definitely felt like red-green was the most consistent and therefore most competitive version of the deck. But if you want the long answer to that question and a bunch of other questions you might end up having about this deck, then I'll be answering all of those on Play MTG. That's Sam Tang's new YouTube channel. Sam Tang is the mind behind Kitchen Table Magic podcast, which has featured everyone from the Professor to Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic. And in October, I'll be on the podcast. So that's pretty cool. But the next few days, Sam and I are going to be dissecting this deck a little bit further, sort of an addendum to this deck, and I'll be addressing a lot of your questions in the comments section on that video. So I'll leave a link in the description for Sam's channel. You can check that out. And remember, in the next few days, I'll be answering some questions about this. But in the meantime, if you're jonesing for Naya Dinosaurs, my boy Wedge over at the Manosaurus put up a Naya Dinosaurs list. Looks pretty strong. So, in the meantime, the between time, you want to check out Naya Dinosaurs, I will also leave you a link for that in the description. But, talk over, let's go ahead and talk about some red-green dinosaurs, because I seriously do think it is the most competitive version of the deck. We're playing 25 creatures in this deck, and I might as well lead with what you want to see and talk about the dinosaurs first. Now, the first dinosaur I want to talk about was probably the most pleasant surprise in the deck. A lot of our cards are obviously good, like Jaw Raptor, obviously good. Carnage Tyrant, ridiculous, right? Regisaur Alpha, duh, of course. But Death Gorge Scavenger surprised me a little bit. We're going to play a Tray. There's actually a lot of interesting tech on this card in Ixalan Standard. Doesn't look like much at first glance, but when you realize that you can just take like Earthshaker Kinras or Scrap Heap Scroungers out of their graveyard, even Dread Wanderers sometimes when you run into that, or even there's going to be decks with like Liliana Death's Majesty that are trying to do stuff, and you'll still run into Godfarer's Gift sometimes too. So just being able to sort of surgically target certain cards in their graveyard is really, really good right now, and sometimes the life ain't half bad either if you're trying to sort of get back up against aggro or just race them sometimes. Attacking for 4 sometimes is pretty strong, and even its starting stats aren't bad for its converted mana cost. And you get its trigger when it enters the battlefield or attacks, so you'll easily get multiple triggers in a game off of the card. And it can gain you like 4-6 life a lot of the time, you know. It can get big on a couple of attack steps. There's just like a lot for Death Gorge Scavenger to do. Again, I was a little surprised by this. I thought the card was decent, but I didn't expect the card to be great. Which it was at the end of the day, but on to a bunch of cards that we all assumed would be really good, and none of us were wrong about, starting with 4 copies of Jaw Raptor. This is easily one of the best creatures in Ixalan Standard. Raptor is just really hard to deal with. Revolted Fatal Push is going to kill him, as well as things like Vraska's Contempt and the occasional Walk the Plank. So there are black removal pieces that we have to worry about, but red looks to be a really important color in the upcoming Standard. It's in a lot of good decks, so there's going to be a lot of damage-based removal, and outside of sometimes Harness Lightning, there's really not a whole lot of it that can take this out. They might sweep you with like Hour of Devastation or something, but you'll still at least get to draw a card off of that, and there's going to be a lot of games, where you draw like 3 cards or more off of a Jaw Raptor. Your opponent might not take this super seriously at first because it's just sort of a 4-5 vanilla dude, you know? But it turns out that letting you draw something every time they want to swing in on you or every time they want to chump block your dude is a huge consequence. And then once you've filled your hand up from this guy, drawn 4 or 5 cards in a game, the chances that you're going to win that game are drastically higher. This card advantage of this caliber doesn't usually come on, like, creatures like this, you know. Aggressively costed huge dude that attacks and blocks well and is above most removal that gets played in Standard. Like, Ripjaw is what we all thought he was. This is an amazing creature. But let me introduce you to my friend Reggie. We're going to play 4 copies of Regisaur Alpha in the deck, another card that is pretty much as good as we assumed it was. Now, one of the only real things you got to worry about with your alpha is Glorybringer, and a lot of people have brought that up, but honestly, even if they do Glorybringer your Regisaur, that still leaves behind a 3/3 trample, which feels an awful lot like playing a Thragtusk, which was always a good card. Yeah, they can kill your one guy, but they still leave behind a guy, which is always amazing. Not only that, but giving a Carnage Tyrant haste, or like the next Ripjaw that you play, not to mention the 3/3 that you get when he enters the battlefield, like, that's all incredibly tasty gravy. It's just gravy, but it's delicious. Like, Carnage Tyrant coming down, swinging 7 immediately is destructive. So Regisaur Alpha just has, like, impact the turn that you play it, and pretty much every turn after that, as long as you're playing a dinosaur. So, and of course, it swings for 4 as well, by itself, so that's good. Just, 5 mana for 7 power on 2 dudes, haste for the rest of the game on the rest of your dinos, and the 3/3 has trample. Like, what kind of deal are you looking for if you don't assume that's good? This card is ridiculous. This card is ridiculous. But now on to Carnage Tyrant, because I've already name dropped him. We're going to play 2 copies of Carnage Tyrant in the deck. We don't want to play too many, at least in the main deck here, but there are times where, like, Carnage Tyrant legit feels like the best Magic card ever printed. In this standard, there are just no options. There's no answers. Really, to deal with this, Settle the Wreckage and Fumigate are the 2 most popular answers, and I think that they may end up making Blue-White Control a real deck in the upcoming standard. Seriously, just having those as options against a card like Carnage Tyrant. There's just nothing you can do. Like, there's sacrifice effects, I guess, but there's no good ones. Like, Trial of Ambition's the only decent at all, even not really one that comes to mind, There's just really not a whole lot they can do about Tyrant once it hits the battlefield. It's just kind of unfreaking believable. I cannot stress how crazy this card is once you actually drop it. But let's cool it down a little bit and talk about those mana dorks that I briefly mentioned earlier. We're going to controversially perhaps play, well not controversially as far as Drover. We're going to play 4 Drover the Mighty, but perhaps controversially, we're going to play 4 copies of Servant of the Conduit here instead of some other rampers we could play. Again, Drover is more or less self-explanatory. I don't have to go too deep into that. Swinging in 3 sometimes is really, really good, and it produces whatever mana we want, and we can spend it on whatever we want. So I'll do that. As far as Servant goes, though, that probably requires at least some explanation, because I didn't play Otepic Huntmaster, which is a very good card, do not get me wrong, but I wanted to be able to produce any color mana, and I wanted to get some energy out of the deal, too. I think it's important to play an energy package in a red-green version of this deck at least. We get a bunch of good stuff, obviously. Attune with Ether, we get Ether Hub in the mana base, that's kind of important. And most importantly, we get Harness Lightning, which I think is maybe the best 2 mana instant speed red removal spell in Standard. In a way, in Ixalan, because you're going to have to worry about opposing Jaw Raptors. That's going to be really important. And you're still going to have to worry about Torrential Gearhulks and stuff like that. And we'd have no way to kill them outside of like double Lightning Strike or double Abrade, which is a position we don't want to be in. I think that getting some extra energy and zapping stuff for as much as 5 sometimes, or even 6 occasionally, is much more important. So we'll play an energy package in this deck, mostly to support Harness Lightning, but also to do a couple of other things, and Servant of the Conduit is one of those things. Honestly, I do think the energy package would still be somewhat supported even without Servant of the Conduit. So if you wanted to play Otepic Huntmaster instead, you could totally do that. I would not begrudge it whatsoever. It's a fine card, and being able to give dinosaurs haste is pretty righteous, obviously. So if you wanted to do that instead, I wouldn't be mad at you. But for the purposes that we're trying to do things here, I've learned how to English one day. For what we're trying to do here, I think that Servant of the Conduit is probably just a better deal overall because it's kind of just does more. I'm also playing a couple of creatures that are neither ramp nor dino, imagine that, but they're some of the most important creatures in the deck, starting with the 2 copies of Ronus the Indomitable. I cannot overstate how relevant this card is. First of all, first things first, it's really easy to get Ronus swinging in this deck. We got like 12 creatures that can just naturally allow him to attack. And we've got like the old trick with Servant of the Conduit. Just use Ronus' onboard ability to pump Servant up, swing in with both of them. And there's some tech with Deathgorge Scavenger actually. If you play a Deathgorge Scavenger, get the ETB trigger, and you got nothing else to make Ronus big, you can always just make Deathgorge Scavenger get +1/+1. Until end of turn. It won't be able to swing in, but it will let your Ronus swing. That can be sometimes relevant. But the best reason, in my eyes, to play Ronus is that it's really our only answer in this color combination for Hazoret, which is going to see a lot of play. Ramanap Red is still a very important deck from the looks of things. Going into Ixalan Standard, we're going to have answers for something like Hazoret, and outside of just like blocking with Carnage Tyrant, we really don't have that many answers. So Ronus is just something that can just profitably block, or at least block, a Hazoret some of the time, or race with it if you get your Ronus first. So I just think that Ronus is such a good foil for Hazoret that it almost completely justifies Ronus being in the deck. But, of course, aside from that, it is, again, super easy to get it attacking. And we'll finish off the creatures with 2 copies of Bristling Hydra in the deck. It's totally fine to play 6 4-drops here because we're playing 8 2-mana guys that ramp us. So it's really, really likely that we'll have 4 mana by turn 3 given that our ramp dudes live. So with that in mind, I don't have a problem playing 6 4-drops in any way. And Bristling Hydra makes it so that we have like literally the 3 hardest to deal with creatures in all of Ixalan Standard. Seriously, between Ripjaw and Carnage Tyrant and Bristling Hydra, they have a seriously hard time removing our guys. And like Regisaur Alpha, I should bring him up too. They can remove him, but he leaves a guy behind. It's just like really, really tough for decks that play, you know, even a decent removal package to deal with all of our guys. Plus, one last thing, I will submit that for thematic purposes, Hydras are almost dinosaurs, very close to dinosaurs, so I'll count it. That leaves room for 10 spells in the deck. Not a whole lot of slots, but we'll try to use them as wisely as possible. We're going to start off with 3 copies of Attune with Ether and 1 copy of Commune with Dinosaurs. Well, I've split this in this way because I'd probably rather see Attune with Ether in the early game, and I really like the energy for Ether Hub, especially, again, that early in the game. So, that said, though, I really want Commune with Dinosaurs late. This is a really good top deck a lot of the time. It's just pure card advantage. It's usually going to nab you a dinosaur, so it's just much better to draw a Commune like post-turn 5 or 6 than it would be to draw an Attune with Ether, so I'll give it a nod here and let it have a slot because it is a really powerful card. Aside from those, we also have to make some room for some removal in the deck because we don't want to just get eaten alive. We've got a lot of high drops in the deck, so sometimes we're going to have to devote our early game to shooting some dudes down to make room for our big guys. So, with that in mind, we're going to play 4 copies of Harness Lightning and 2 copies of Abrade. Now, as far as Abrade slot goes, I've gone back and forth with it using Shock, Lightning Strike, and Magma Spray, but I still feel like Abrade is probably the best choice for the 2 of removal slot in this deck. You know, it's easily the most versatile piece. We will be seeing Godfarer's Gift still attempting to be a thing despite all the hate, and there's going to be other artifacts aside from just GPG. So, still, Abrade looking like a good choice. And Harness Lightning's got to be in there, mostly because we want to be able to kill stuff that's bigger than most red removal can kill, and Harness Lightning is pretty good at that. Here's the mana base, and it's pretty much what you'd expect. Playing some Ramanap Ruins, Hashep Oasis in there to make our already huge dinosaurs even bigger, or occasionally turn like a Servant of the Conduit into a 5/5. That can be pretty important sometimes too. We're also going to play at least 1 Sheltered Thicket. That gives us a total of like 6 cards in the main deck that can draw us cards. That's pretty good for a mid-range deck right there. And we're also going to just play the 1 unclaimed territory in this deck, because we've only got like 13 dinosaurs. It can sometimes be the red source for a Regisaur Alpha, or the second green source for a Carnage Tyrant. Those things are important, but I don't want to go too overboard, because we got an awful lot of cards in this deck that aren't specifically dinosaurs. And here's the sideboard for now, at least. It's the very, very beginning of the format. The set's not even legal to play as I record this video, so we don't know exactly what the standard coming up is going to look like, but we have some ideas, and I've tried to address them with this board. First of all, some anti-aggro elements so that we can more easily get into the late game, and mid-game even, against those decks. Magma Spray, Abrade, and Sweltering Suns are all good anti-aggro cards, and Magma Spray is going to be able to just exile Shaker Kenras, and Scrap Heap Scroungers, and Dread Wanderers, all kinds of stuff you'll never have to worry about. Magma Spray is actually a pretty decent card and can even be used, just like all of our red removal, to occasionally just draw a card off of Jaw Raptor. That should be mentioned. Abrade will also come in against small aggro decks, but can also be brought in against artifacts. Versatility is key. And then Sweltering Suns is really for just when you have to have a reset against, again, extremely fast aggro that fills the board quickly. We can have problems against that because it's going to be tough to stabilize against a really, really full board because we have a lot of singular threats. So something like Sweltering Suns can really help us get to the mid-game against those decks. 3 Glory Bringers in there, mostly for when we come up against other Regisaur Alphas. In that situation, Glory Bringer really is the better card, but I like Regisaur in a lot of other situations, so I'll combine the Glory Bringers to the board. I think it is one of the more improved cards in Ixalan Standard, but I don't want to play a ton of 5-drops in the main deck, so I will pair. I'll pack some Glory Bringers, but I'll relegate them to the sideboard in favor of a more thematic element that I think is a lot better in most situations. Nissa Vital Force is in there against control so that we can have some resiliency. We can resolve a Nissa, then we can more easily get back some of the dinos just in case we do lose them. Nothing drops a control player's face like actually getting a Fumigate off against the Carnage Tyrant and then us resolving a Nissa and just bringing it back to our hand. So Vital Force can sometimes be really important against control for other reasons too. Her first ability is great and her ultimate's awesome too. Carnage Tyrant, another one of Carnage Tyrant. We'll just finish off the sideboard here again against control decks. If Blue-White Approach really is a deck, as a lot of people are saying it is, and I've been messing around with the deck, it looks like it might for serious be real in this upcoming standard here, then Carnage Tyrant's going to be pretty important. One last note on the board here, I didn't include this card because I was already afraid the budget was getting very out of hand with this deck, but you could try 2 copies of Chandra, Torch of Defiance in the sideboard here. Another $30 card. I can't control the price of Carnage Tyrant, and I can't control the price of Chandra. She's up to 33 to 35 right now on TCG Player, but she might be worth it if you're trying to go really, really competitive with this deck. And I honestly think she's one of the best choices for it, but again, I just didn't want to add 70 some odd dollars to the budget. And here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 68, pretty good way to start the season. That's a pretty boss high score. And it does suffer in some places, notably resiliency. We've got a bunch of big threats in this deck, so that's one way that we kind of are resilient. If they can take care of one thing, there's a pretty high chance that we'll just be able to play another big thing within a couple of turns that they, again, are forced to deal with or usually lose the game, especially against slower decks. But all in all, our resiliency isn't super high. Once creature's gone, it's more or less gone in most cases. That can be a bummer, but the good part about that is that a lot of our creatures are tough to get gone in the first place. Again, Jaw Raptor, Bristling Hydra, Carnage Tyrant, these are all 3 easily some of the hardest creatures to deal with in Standard right now. So just being able to get rid of them in the first place is going to kind of be a serious chore for your opponent. And the best thing about this deck is that the curve is very, very real. Like getting turn 2 Mana Dork into turn 3 Ripjaw, turn 4 Regisaur Alpha, turn 5 Carnage Tyrant sometimes. It's just so freaking crazy. But even if you don't get a Mana Dork, sometimes we'll just go like turn 2 Removal, zap that guy, turn 3 Ronus into turn 4 anything, turn 4 Ripjaw Raptor, Bristling Hydra, doesn't matter, Ronus gets turned on at that point. You go turn 5 Regisaur and the game's over. We've just got the ability to play the best creatures in Standard every single turn on the curve. It's just kind of super scary for a lot of decks. It can get really out of hand very, very quickly because, again, our creatures are tough to deal with, so if we play a Jaw Raptor, they're usually still trying to figure out the best way to deal with it by the time we play our Regisaur Alpha. And then by the time we play our Carnage Tyrant, they usually haven't dealt with either of the 2 guys that we played first. So it's just like seriously overwhelming, which I love. That's what Dinosaurs should be. So I'm tapped out for now, at least I think I am. If you got any questions or concerns or anything like that, hit me up in the comments section. I'll try to get to you down there, but do remember that in the next few days, I should be on Sam Tang's channel on Play MTG talking about the frequently asked questions about this deck. So look forward to that too. If you enjoyed the video, I hope you did. Put a lot of work into this one. You can always smash the like button. It helps me out a little bit. You can also sub if you're new or if you just, for whatever reason, haven't done that yet because it is Deck Tech season and there's a lot going on around here. So make sure you do that and hit the bell to be sure that you get notifications. You can also follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev or kick us a buck on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. Help me keep bringing these decks to you. And remember, all the prices in this video are from Aspansa, TCG Player right here. They also help me bring you deck techs. If you want to view this whole deck list, just click the first link in the description. That'll take you right over to them, and you can check it out, do whatever you want to from there. But anyway, I'm your boy Dev from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.